bring the regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee to order. We have a quorum, Mr. Smith, Mr. Weezer, Mr. Rosenthal, myself, Bernard Parks, as chair. I'm sure we'll have Mr. Kretz will be here shortly. What we'd like to do, as we've done in the past, is to ask committee whether we could support consent on item 8, basically one of the routine business tax overpayments. So we could move that item. And then we can go into closed session on items 1 and 2, which should be fairly quick cases. And when we come back, what I'd like to do is start, I think we have Mr. Halpern here for number 11. We'd like to start out of order with number 11, dealing with the commission. So we're going to go in closed session first, and then we'll be right back. Okay? Thank you. regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee, and we're going to start off with number 11 because we have a commissioner here who can not take up more time than he has available. So we can have one up.
And item 11 is a verbal status report relative to options for revenue generation and the Commission on Revenue Efficiency.
Good morning, or rather good afternoon, Mr. Chair and council members. I'm Ron Galperin, Chair of the Commission on Revenue Efficiency. Glad to be here, and also with fellow Commissioner Michael Gagan. And thank you for the opportunity to present a brief status report on where we are with the Commission. A little bit of history. As you know, on February 10th, the Council initiated and created this Commission. There are 7 members on the Commission. Our task is to look for improvements in revenue collections, tax compliance, accounts receivable collections, new receivables, centralized billing, and some other revenue-related studies. Since we have been formed, actually our first meeting was in March, and we have had 15 meetings here to date, actually one this morning and one on Thursday. And we are in the process of finalizing our first set of recommendations, which I think come at a very good time, especially in light of the recent Controller's follow-up audit on collections. The proposals are going to be targeted to reforming collections and the mechanisms and systems of accountability and incentives necessary to realize the greater revenue and efficiency that everybody wants, and to ensure that we are not in this same situation yet again the next time that there is an audit, because we just see the same problems over and over again. So we're offering suggestions to change the citywide billings and collections guidelines. These are all going to be part of the recommendations that are made and will be heard in the future. Better reporting, standardization of practices, and also changing the current practice where so much is recommended in terms of what departments are supposed to do, as opposed to actually being a process that happens automatically. So this process, in terms of our own recommendations, is hopefully going to be wrapped up for this phase of our work in July, and we're also in the process of performing our due diligence around that before we actually present that. Our next stage is going to be about tax compliance, securing our proper share of intergovernmental transfers, other revenue-related studies. Briefly, we've had a whole bunch of different departments come to us, Office of Finance repeatedly, but also the City Treasurer, the Police Commission, DOT, Sanitation, the CAO, the CLA, and a coalition of city workers, just to mention a few of them. So I'd be happy to address any questions that you have in terms of where we're going with all of this. We really want to have everything finalized amongst our 7 commissioners before we make these public, as it were, but we're pretty darn close.
Okay. Let me just ask, I think the original motion talked about a 6-month period. Are you going to, with the number of things you're talking about, is that going to take you beyond the 6 months? Is there going to be an extension or what?
Well, we are at the 3.5-month stage, and we felt from the very beginning, and this was also direction from everybody on the council, that the number one focus ought to be relating to that which has to do with collections and to the current system, which in many ways is a broken system. So that is the focus of our reforms, and by the end of the 4-month period, we'll have our recommendations out on that. And we'd like to use the next 2 months, and if we're extended even further, that will be at the discretion, of course, of the council to pursue the other revenue-related studies and issues that we've outlined. Okay.
And then are you evaluating the Macias report as part of your review, or is this independent of that study?
Absolutely. We have reviewed the Macias report. We had Macias consultants come and speak to us. We've also had the fire department come and talk with us about that. We've reviewed also the analysis that the Controller's audit has about the Macias report, much of which we agree with, and that's certainly been an important part of this.
Okay. And then on the issue of, you said you're looking to roll it out in what, 2 or 3 phases, as far as the report, or one?
It's going to be at 1, actually. We've got a draft at this point, which lays out, we have the outline of it, and it also lays out 1 by 1 by 1 recommendations specifically of how to address various aspects related to the issues of authority, related to the issues of incentivization, accountability, et cetera.
Also, you're going to be covering, I would hope, some of the issues that deal with the legality. There's ordinances that are in play that have limited, in the sense of review time and things of that nature. Are you doing any research in that regard as far as current ordinances? that are in
Well,
place?
we certainly have a number of recommendations about ordinances that we believe ought to be looked at for change, as well as new potential ordinances. I don't know that we've reviewed every single collections-related ordinance that is out there, but we've also been in dialogue with the city attorney's office and clearly recognize the need for a lot of the changes that are being recommended to be tied to ordinance change.
Okay. Let me just ask, as one of, and in fact, probably simultaneously with the creation of the commission, there was an ordinance that was put forth that's in Budget and Finance. We'd ask that you, in fact, this is basically almost the same number as the creation is of 092560-S1. It talks about a internal city review task force. If you can incorporate that as part of it, we can keep that package together so that we're not having to deal with singular issues as this overall issue. So if we can ask you to include that, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely, although I have to say we've been sort of asking repeatedly about what is the status of that working group that was supposed to have been created pursuant to that motion that accompanied the creation of CORE. Perhaps the Office of Finance might want to give an update on where that stands.
Yeah, I don't, we've not heard from it. I don't know if it's been created. It's one of the many things that we're finding in looking at this issue of revenue, that there's probably a dozen different types of motions that are floating, and today we're going to try to pull a lot of them under one umbrella so that we're not dealing with them independently but collectively to respond to this issue. We've had revenue days, and there's still some pending pieces from that, so that's one of the things that we're going to deal with 3 or 4 of the motions that are in committee today. But we'd ask on that one if you would incorporate that issue and see whether it's viable as you're going through your assessment, so that we can have that couched into the larger issue of your response.
We will most certainly do so. We are aware of a revenue management committee that exists and that is convened on a quarterly basis by the Office of Finance. Mm-hmm. And we'll have some recommendations specifically about how to perhaps improve how that operates.
And also, you're looking at technology?
Oh, absolutely.
Software, hardware?
Not necessarily very detailed when it relates to software, but clearly one of the problems is the type of information that we have, where you've got computer systems that are not cooperating with each other. And one of the things we've also requested is to just look at all the various data pools that are out there, because we talk about sharing data between various departments or between the Office of Finance and others, but before you can even unify that software, you've got to really look at what's out there to even share. And the opportunities, and we've identified what we believe many of those would be.
What about FMIS? Have you looked at that?
Yes, we have. And as I understand it, right now there's a question of exactly how money gets implemented to put that into place. But that's going to be an essential part of making sure that there is a greater movement towards centralization.
In fact, I think one of the things we're going to ask the CAO on what the status on their account receivable segment of FMIS. In fact, Ray, if you have that now, we can kind of throw this into this discussion. What's the current status of that element?
Sure. Actually, we had a FMS POC meeting this morning. One of the things that we discussed was the status of the accounts receivable module and how to move forward. I know our office has drafted the report, and it's ready to go. I think a couple of things that we are looking at is, one, we are going to need a contract amendment, and that will need to be drafted with CGI. Before we can actually put that contract amendment together, though, we have to make sure that we have all inclusive of sort of the scope of work that will be required of the contractor And I know the Office of Finance, along with the FMS team, will be meeting to basically define that scope of work and basically pull that all together so we can get it before you in the next few weeks.
Okay, and did we put some funds away in this budget to address that accounts receivable?
We did. We basically $500,000, 500,000 we set aside for any costs that could not be MECLA funded.
Great.
Just, what was the time frame you have on this first element, and then what you're going to do the other parts?
Oh, sure. As I mentioned, we are about 3.5 months since our creation. Within the next several weeks before the end of July, you're going to have a report that is submitted, you being the council and the city as a whole. I believe that will be submitted through Audits and Governmental Efficiency, and that will set the ball rolling on review of all of these set of recommendations, which we really look as being a comprehensive set of recommendations that pull from a lot of what's come before us, including specifics about how to get done things that are in the controller's audit that repeatedly, unfortunately, have not gotten done. So once that is done, of course, we will be available to assist when it comes to any kind of additional testimony, et cetera, that is related to that. But in terms of what comes next, it's going to be a variety of things. We're really interested, as I mentioned, in a whole variety of intergovernmental transfers, money that we're supposed to get from other entities that we may or may not be getting our fair share of. My personal belief is we're not. Looking at how do you make departments think more entrepreneurially and what opportunities there might be to generate revenue with existing assets that we have. So we don't have a lot of time to do it, but we've been working, I think, as expeditiously as we can.
Very good, thank you.
Oh, and please,
Yeah,
Commissioner
Mr.
Gagan.
Chairman, members, Michael Gagan. I think the second tranche of work that the chairman is referring to would come in the form of a second report, so it won't be part of the report that you see toward the end of this month.
I just look forward to your report, especially your recommendations and steps and how we can implement them. Thank you.
Let me just ask one other thing. Of
course.
Have you looked at Executive Order 5?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. 'Cause that's on our agenda today, and it doesn't look like we're making much progress on it. So-
How true that is. I will just add the following comments about that. There is a report card, as it were, that is issued annually on compliance with Executive Order Number 5. It's unclear to me whether in the past the council has or hasn't been copied on this, although it's my understanding that in the future that will hopefully be happening. And it essentially looks at each of the 7 criteria that are in Executive Order Number 5 and an overall grade of departments and how they're complying. Now, in the most recent
Who
report
does that
card...
report card?
Pardon me?
Who does that?
That is done by the Office of Finance.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
In that most recent report card, of the 7, there were 7 criteria, that is. 3 got a overall grade below standard. 2 got a grade of above standard. And then 2 got a grade of standard. But let me just briefly state what somehow deemed the grade of standard. One of the 7 is that there are supposed to be departmental reports of uncollectible accounts for write-off that are submitted in a particular fashion. In fact, 10 of 20 departments were in compliance. Somehow that is standard. And then there was an insurance that a designated department executive liaison regularly attend Revenue Management Committee meetings, and this is something that I made mention of also. So 8 of 20 have regularly attended those meetings in terms of departments. Now, there are 4 departments that don't necessarily need to attend with such regularity or have been deemed to not necessarily need that. But again, whether that is standard or below standard is something that certainly I think decision makers will want to look at in the city. So one of the major issues that we've looked at is why there is continued failure and consistent failure, unfortunately, to comply with a lot of the 7 criteria in that Executive Directive number 5.
Okay. Thank you very much, because we're going to deal with that as item, I think, 12 today, and we've not seen much progress in the last 2 quarterly reports.
Well, one of our, not to give too much away here, but one of our recommendations is to take out the discretionary aspect of this when it comes to the departments and just make it a de facto process.
As far as discretion of attending meetings or reporting,
Well, some of it related to that, but when it comes, for example, to the issue of penalties and late fees,
Okay, yeah.
There's been a continued request by departments to submit their proposals one by one for that to be changed, as opposed to just creating an omnibus ordinance whereby that happens, presenting it to the departments with, say, 30 days' notice to say, speak now, forever hold your peace, and then put it into place.
as far as having a standardized, what interest and penalty aspect of late billing.
Correct.
Now, that would be done by the department, or would that be done once those accounts go to Office of Finance for collection?
Well, that would be applied, there's a 45-day period generally, and we're looking at how do you change the whole time flow and the whole process flow, and there's actually a whole chart that's in the citywide guidelines and how you alter that. But certainly, if you don't have the systems in place to keep track of when that interest, when that penalty kicks in, then you're not going to have it. To say nothing of the fact that you don't have it when you don't even have an ordinance that authorizes it.
Okay, I see. Okay. All right, let me just, any other questions? Let me just ask that, we ask that the clerk place this on our agenda as these reports are coming forth, and you give us an estimate latter July, your first report?
It is going to be the end of July.
Okay, so whatever the meeting that's closely related to when their first report that we can have on the agenda to update. Also ask the committee to look at the other motion that was created around the same time that deals with the revenue collection task force and respond. And we look forward particularly for your comments on the quarterly report regarding Executive Order 5, because we've dealt with that a number of times. And then, but again, we will ask for that instruction to have this rescheduled for this committee once that first segment of the report is complete.
And we in the Commission really want to thank you for all of the attention and all of the effort that's being paid to this issue right now. Also to very much thank Councilmember Koretz and his staff, who have been very, very helpful in this process to us.
Okay, thank you.
Just curious if David Farrar wants to add anything. You're a member of this commission.
Oh, I didn't even realize you were here.
I'm sorry, I arrived late.
I had my back to you. My apologies.
No, I think,
Welcome.
Come on up, David.
discussed this earlier, I
Come on up to the mic so we can get you on the record here. Just a bit of a wise old sage. I don't know how old he is, but he's been around this world a lot. And I'd be just curious if you want to add anything to what the chair or your member colleague
Well,
said.
first of all, let me apologize for being late, and especially to the chairman. And not having heard everything Ron said, I'm a little tepid that whatever I might say, we might disagree with something he said. So I'm going to try to be judicious. But I would like to say this, that as I think you pointed out, and also Chief Parks, I have been following this collections issue for a long, long time. And I think when I talked about it with Chief Parks 3 years ago, we discovered that
We
the
call him councilman now, by the way. So
council, well, you know,
He knows I'll answer the hey.
I grew up in the hood. I grew up in the hood, and but we at that time were looking at these tremendous write-offs that you were facing with respect to ambulance collections, and lo and behold, we found that the city had a statute which, for all practical purposes, prohibited the collections of it, because it prohibited anything other than the department personnel doing it. So the statute, last summer, I guess it was, you finally got that changed, and I'm really glad. So I think a lot of progress is being made on that. I know a hearing was held this morning with Councilman Smith's committee, and that was considered, and I think it's been forwarded on to council. I'm very pleased with that. Now, having said that, let me just say one thing. I think all those reports talk about there's this many millions of dollars lost, there's this many million. Nobody really knows. But I would say that just based on my analysis over the years, the city is losing $50 million a year by not focusing on this problem. That's the MS and parking and all the aggregate. Now, that's $50 million a year. Now, the interesting thing about that is that that's $1 million a week. So for every day you guys have hearings, and every week we put this off to next month, and this morning I think Councilman Reyes says, well, can't we just put this whole thing off to sometime in September or October? Just keep in mind, every time you kick the can down the road, it's costing you $1 million a week. I really believe that passionately. Now, there's disagreement about that and whatever, but I really do believe it passionately, and I was asked to say what I thought. Now, the problem with that is there's no catching up on it. Collections and accounts receivables are more perishable than tomatoes. If you don't collect those within 60, 90, 180 days, your chances of ever collecting them are very, very, very small. And I think the city experienced that when it tried to factor some of its accounts receivables recently, 1 or 2 pennies on the dollar. That's because that's all there were. So I just want to urge, whatever you do, there is a sense of urgency about it that I don't think has ever been fully appreciated. And I want to articulate that urgency to say that $1 million a week would actually save Cheryl Parisi and her people a lot of jobs somewhere out there if the council and the mayor and the leaders of the city could move this thing forward so that collections would be improved. And I don't want to say anything else because I think there's a whole lot of other agendas. There's a whole lot of people that can say you should do this and not that. But I just want my point to be made is, however long it takes you to decide, you're losing $1 million
Yeah, I just want to be
week.
clear about this. I don't want to lose $1 million a day. It's a no-brainer to me.
Just a week.
I think the colleagues feel the same way. So make sure you give us a quick enough road map that's simple and easy for us to move it through the process. I don't think a single colleague would be upset if they could realize we could save $1 million a month.
Well,
if you could show it in clarity, $1 million a week.
I'll accept that as something not to address right this minute, but let me just say, if I wanted to be very critical of all you folks and your predecessors with respect to this issue, the council has acted on this issue probably many, many times. I don't know how many, but Joel Wax was the first guy that brought this issue to the attention of the council. That was before any of you guys were on the council. Followed by Laura Chick when she was chairman of audit and government efficiency, and then brought up again by Laura Chick when she was controller. And each time the council's action has been the same. Create a task force to study and report back to council with recommendations as to what we can do. So I would just encourage you, whatever else you do, don't punt to the study and report back option. It's ineffective. The council has been directing people to study and report back for 10 years now, and that has not resulted in one more nickel being collected.
Let me just say, in response to that, is our intent in this committee is to keep this item on the agenda to get these things implemented post haste. So that's what our commitment, that's why it's on the agenda today, why we're pulling everything under one umbrella, and it will be constantly agendized until each one of these pieces have been implemented. And so we're looking for that report. And I want to ask the clerk if we can make sure their report, they get July 6th report, becomes part of the file, and so that we can have that as a reference.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the report back is actually going to be your report, and then from there on, the big difference this time is I think we all realize we have to take action, and everything that could be implemented will have to be implemented. And I just point out, I think this report is actually going to be transmitted to Audits and Government Efficiency Committee, and that's where it's going to be heard.
Well, let me just say, and I don't mean to hog the microphone here, but I love having this forum. I do think that the previous study and report backs have differed from this one you just referred to in one central respect. the study and report backs in all previous directives had been basically to the staff people, the CAO, CLA, Office of Finance, and whatever, that might continue to come up with the same answers. In this particular case, I think through your leadership, Paul, you chose to put people like us, who are, in my case, retired and old enough that I don't mind saying what I think anymore, who are mostly outsiders and who are not people inside that are trying to put things in a way that make each other feel good. And I think the fact that you picked 7 people, all of whom I think have great integrity, including Cheryl Parisi, the labor lady, to be working together on this issue confirms what you just said, that this is finally going to be an action agenda and not a report back agenda.
And also, when you, if I can just add finally, when you look at why certain things have not been implemented, there's often a good reason why that hasn't happened. And we've looked at those reasons and have tried as best as we can to address them. When you ask each and every department one by one to come back with a proposal for late fees and penalties, it's not going to be a great surprise when it doesn't happen. But if you make it happen from the top, and then you say, this is the way it's going to be, that's how it's going to get done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Look forward to your report.
I'd like to go to item 10.
Let's see.
Item 10 is actually the SAO and CLA joint report relative to the establishment of proposed Office of Economic Analysis.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'll just give a quick summary on this proposal. It's actually it's nice to work on something that's not exclusively about the budget for a change. This is an idea that was introduced by Councilman Garcetti and Smith to have us put in within the city structure an office whose sole responsibility is to look at various policy initiatives and establish the economic impact it has to the broader community. Originally, it was modeled after an idea that was developed in San Francisco through initiative, where within the controller's office, there was an office whose sole purpose is to evaluate specific proposals by the legislative body. In this particular case, we're not recommending using the initiative process, but we are recommending that we borrow from elements of what was done in San Francisco and essentially look at establishing an office initially within the CAO's office, but possibly eventually within a Department of Economic Development. And I know that's something that the city has been in consideration for some time now. What we would recommend that as an initial step for this review is that we put together a group of economists that we engage in through an RFQ process. Based on a broad level of criteria to see who out there within not just Los Angeles, but in the broader community would be interested in partnering with us in this kind of assessment. And then what this does, it allows you as a council then to establish which issues we would actually review. So the process is that if there were to be a major item before you and one of your members felt it would be valuable to have this analysis, you would introduce a motion directing our office and the CLA to come up with a framework for that analysis and return back to you. Once that was approved, so that we all understood what exactly we were reviewing, we would use one of the economists that we have put on the list following this RFQ to essentially conduct that work. And then that report would be done independent. It would analyze those issues and then present it back to my office in the CLA, where we would submit a summary report to your council for your consideration on the specific matter before you. This is a step that we recommend proceeding forward. We're fortunate in that there should be no additional cost to the city as a result of a contribution made by Council President Garcetti for this purpose of $250,000 from AB 1290 funds. So as a pilot, this project is already has a funding source for the initial phase. And then based on that, we review it to see how that works. And as the idea of an Department of Economic Development becomes more formalized, then we consider whether to store it within that particular office. So this is what our recommendation is following the motion by Garcetti and Smith.
Let me just ask, when you talk about going out to RFP, would the people you're looking for be different than the current bench of FAs and different people that are already been identified? Is it a different skill set?
Very different. I think we're looking more at folks who have a greater economic background, not just a business background. Economists who may likely have PhDs or have, their whole body of work is based on looking at the economy. We obviously want to have a full range of different kinds of economists, those depending on what the specific issue is. An FA's job is basically to help us, in some case, go as far as being the underwriter for some of the work that we do, but also provide us the business management. For example, in the case of the garages that we're looking for the long-term leases, they provide us sort of the best practices that are used throughout the country. They are the interplay between us and some of the vendors. They advise us on how to ensure that we get the best deal possible for the city. That's a very different skill set than an economist who's an academic who looks at these at a much more macro level and will analyze a particular policy initiative. Let's say, for example, what we recently did when it comes, and an example of this would be the recent discussion around the internet tax. There was, we made a recommendation that while there was a short-term loss in revenue that was small, that there would be a longer possibility of even greater loss if we imposed the tax to a particular sector that currently did not receive it, and who had no reason to be in Los Angeles, could easily move to the city of Commerce or Industry or somewhere else. And so we did that through our analysis with the Department of Finance and the CLA. What in this, if we were to look at it much global, excuse me, I apologize for that, we would want to do an assessment. Let's say we wanted to broaden that to a broader arena or sector. It would be useful to have sort of an economist look at what the ripple effect of that would be. In the same way, a proposal that may have a negative impact. For your purposes of making the best decision, it would be helpful to know what that impact would be.
Yeah. In fact, having looked at that San Francisco model, the one thing, and I agree on this, since their controller is appointed, so that was where they placed it independent. From my perspective, I don't know eventually where the Economic Development Department goes, but the fact that we are looking for an independent view and that department head would work for the mayor, it would appear that we now are basically have to go through the mayor's office to get that independent review. In my judgment, it's where you're talking about the pilot and the CAO is where it should rightfully be placed permanently, to where you now have a position that works for both the mayor and the council, and you then have the ability to list these folks that are on the bench to go out and do those studies, and some may be mandated by the council and their need, and some may be asked for by the mayor. And so it would appear that we've seen, in fact, one of the items we're going to deal with on today, item 12, the fact that this committee has been pushing department heads to get accurate information to budget to Office of Finance now for a number of years about collections, and we're still riding with about a 48% rate of them complying. And so I would recommend, from my perspective, that it be a CAO position because you're dealing with our issue of the budget, you're dealing with our debt, you're dealing with a variety of things that kind of fit into this. And the other thing I think we mentioned during the budget, we do need to enhance, even though it would not go to the depth of this report, we do need to enhance our fiscal impact information on CAO reports. We've kind of been shy on some of that information to where many of them come through from committees without financial impact. And we do need to enhance that so we know what some of the short and long-term impacts of our decisions. And this proposal would go even farther.
A couple of things I want to reiterate is that when we brought this motion, we were looking at an economic development department. Whether it's a function of the CAO or a freestanding department, which would be very difficult to create in these days and times, I understand, we need a professional core. This should not be a civil service position that is created that a week before the person who's doing economic development work in animal services at an MA3 level or something. These need to be professionals that know how to go out and encourage economic development. Because I have seen, as I look around this country, cities is smaller than the San Fernando Valley that have economic development department, and they kick us in the rear in head-to-head competition because we don't have people that know how to do packaging of economic development programs. And it may go from one mayor to the next, where one mayor is totally committed and the next one's not. We can't afford that. We need a really dedicated staff of professionals to go out and put LA in a strong, competitive position to bring back economic development and maybe even a headquarter operation someday back in this city. That's the intent. So I hope if we begin on this process of what you've recommended, that it's only the first step toward a larger vision, and that is the second largest city in America. God darn it, better have an economic development department.
No, I agree. I think that is absolutely essential that we have that. On this group of people that are analyzing our decisions, I just have a different view that it should be separate and apart from the economic development department, but somewhere we all have access.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of where this could be placed where it would be the most objective and the least vulnerable to political pressures, and I'm not sure, no negative towards you, but just in general, the CAO and the CAO's office might be the place where the most political pressure is placed by the council and the mayor. And I would think either the controller's office or an EDD might be a little bit less so. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as someone who's been in the middle of that often.
Well, I think it goes back to what Councilmember Park said, is that I think because my office is in the middle, we're forced to sort of to be independent. I have 16 bosses, and as a result, the recommendations we make are based on what our assessment of the best interests of the city is, and they stand as they are. I think that the point that Councilman Park made, that this is an office that reports both to the mayor and the council, I think gives it even a slightly greater flexibility than a department that only reports to the mayor. Which the CDD, we did look at the controller as a possibility, and I think that's certainly, that office is clearly independent. This is beyond, the controller looks at internally at our own operations as a city and identifies where we could be more efficient, and identifies where there's problems in our fiscal management and accounting. I'm not familiar of instances where the controller looks externally and sort of looks at what impact does a policy decision have on the larger community. And this is what I understood the challenge to be, is to look at what is the ripple effect of a decision that's before you. And that's part of the work that my office does, and certainly part of the work that the CLA does as well. It's consistent with examples that I gave, like the internet tax, where we had to reconcile both the revenue issues plus the larger economic issues as well as the long-term issues. So I have no personal, one thing I felt strongly about, if it was going to be placed in my office, I felt it was important that we not hire up for it, that we instead utilize economists out in the field, because this is a very specific expertise that is needed. I see my office as more as a facilitator to basically take the ideas that you have, sort of translate them and provide them greater depth and into a framework, and then have an economist do an independent assessment of that, and basically take that assessment and submit it back to the council in a way that's consistent with the way of the issues that we're looking at. The analysis that's done at the end of the day will be that of the economist. And so to the extent that that's, independent, I think that having an outsider do that is an important step, because whatever politics may exist, hopefully will be minimized one step further by having an expert who now is guided by a field of principles within his or her discipline in economics to ensure that that independence takes place. So I think so we did consider all those options.
Thank you.
Okay, just wanted to comment, did you talk with Joe Chesak, the incoming chair of the Greater Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce?
I spoke to
Gary Tobin.
I spoke to Gary. I met with Gary a few weeks ago. I spoke to him even as soon as last week, and they're in support of this proposal.
Joe Chesak mentioned it to me. He's a constituent of mine. He's going to be the new chair, and he was very, very excited about it. And I really want to thank Eric Garcetti, leadership in moving forward with Mr. Smith as well to bring it to at least today. I was going to put a motion in, but I found there was a motion already in that now has seen the light of day. My position is real clear. It's got to be totally independent. It's got to stand on its own merits. It's got to be able to fall on a sword, and it's got to be people that are fearless in that regard. I don't know about the two in San Francisco, if they have that attitude or not, but I know that's what the private sector is saying, to me at least. And frankly, I don't want politics as much as I want the sensibility of what they might offer us to help us, just like Farah over there said, he has no more access to grind. He's just out there, and it's that kind of energy I want, independent energy that helps us analyze our situations. But thank you for moving forward with it.
So we currently do fiscal analysis, our fiscal impact statement for all our policy initiatives, correct?
We do a fiscal analysis from the standpoint of the impact it has on our finances. So if we're entering into accepting a grant, we want to make sure that everyone understands that there's a match that's required in that grant, and then we are explicit about whether we believe the department has the ability to take in those extra monies. And so it's an internal review of the impact of a decision on our own internal financial status, whether it's in the budget, whether it follows our basic financial policies. And unless it's called for based on the nature of the work, then it doesn't necessarily talk about the external impact, whether or not we believe this will have a ripple effect in creating jobs or killing jobs, or whether or not there's a long-term benefit or long-term harm for a decision. That's done in a very limited scope. The internet tax is the closest thing that, at least in the short time that I've been here, that we've done where we did that. But what this office would do would basically take an idea and look at it strictly from the impact it would have in the broader community, from an economic standpoint. Will it help create jobs? Will it help revitalize the economy? Or will it create the opposite effect? Will it make it harder to do business in Los Angeles? Will it scare away other businesses? Will it destroy jobs? And so that's really sort of a different function from the fiscal analysis that's within the reports that we provide.
And you don't have the capacity in your office right now to do that?
Not to the extent that I think you're looking for. What I read from the motion, and certainly talking to the authors and the chamber, which I think is a sponsor of it from the outside, I think what you're looking for is a broader point of view of what it has. And again, there's really, the reason why I recommend hiring or selecting economists is that there may be an economist who specializes in a particular issue that's very relevant to what you're asking, but has nothing to do with what you're asking a month later. And yet we may have somebody else. So we want to be able to be flexible so that we get the best recommendations.
So what do you envision then with this pilot? You're going to contract out with somebody, you're going to bring them in-house? What do you envision? Because I think you're right. If whatever limited funding we have, whatever economic expert we get, they're going to probably be experts in some certain areas of economics, and we're going to be drawing upon them to do a number of different areas, different types of economic issues. So, or are we going to go out in case-by-case basis, have some funding available to contract with those economists that could help us on specific issues? How do we envision this working?
Well, Councilman Garcetti has provided $250,000 out of his AB 1290 funds to get this started. I do not recommend adding someone to my staff to do this work. What I recommend is that we do an RFQ initially, basically see who's interested in being on a panel of potential economists, so that when it's the first step after we have a panel, then when your council asks for a particular review to take place, and again, the starting point is your council directing this to happen, then based on what the specific question is, then we would go to the panel of economists that responded to the RFQ, and then if there's a handful of them that specialize in that area, then we would do sort of like a mini RFP and see who can come up with the best option, and then contract specifically with that economist.
So that $250,000 is only going to go so far. After a few policy initiatives, we're going to dry up that money real quick.
I think that is a likelihood. It's, of course, driven by how many things is asked by the council, and it's our job to make sure that as we deplete that one-time source of funds, if there's going to be a request, once it's down to zero, if there's going to be a request for additional analysis, we're going to have to ask for the appropriation to go with it.
Well, we saw how much the ECAF consultant cost us, which was quite a bit.
Right.
It's way more than $250,000. That was one issue. I imagine that this money, is $250,000, is probably going to be taken up by one or two big issues, or maybe 5 or 6 small issues, but this is going to go really fast.
Right.
That's why the idea of an economic development department, I think, really strikes a chord with me, because we need something consistent that could do this type of work, but can also help us with revitalizing our low-income areas where we need more investment, et cetera. We try to do economic development projects right now in the city. You're dealing with 5, 6 different departments. It's very difficult to corral the cats into getting them all focused on one particular project and how to do it. I have developers coming to my office very interested in investing in low-income areas of my neighborhood, but it's the city that sometimes becomes an obstacle in making that happen or possible, because we just stumble upon ourselves over and over. But I think if we have that consistent advice who could do that, plus also do this type of advice when we need it and draw upon, and not quickly draw up the $250,000, that's fine. So there's a great idea. I think there's a huge need for it, but we should just be realistic about how much this is actually going to work for us. $250,000 is going to dry up real quick.
That's right. Any other questions? Before you leave, Miguel, let me just ask, 2 people have cards, Beverly Kenworthy and Maya, is it Zutler? Zutler, okay.
Good afternoon, council members. Beverly Kenworthy with the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce. And yes, Joe Chiswick is a big supporter of this, as well as our entire board. We really appreciate Councilmember Garcetti and Councilmember Smith's leadership on this, as well as the really good feedback we've gotten from other council members, recognizing that, certain council actions have economic consequences that we may not always understand, and providing an additional tool for analysis is always a good thing. We think the questions that you have raised are important ones, certainly where the appropriate place this should be, as well as, the future. $250,000 is a really great start. Thank you to the Councilmember Garcetti. But we know that we are going to have more work to do on developing an independent office in the long term. So anyway, we know that this is a model that has worked well for San Francisco, and we feel that once we see the positive results, hopefully there will be a snowball effect, and we can move forward to make this a reality for our city. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Maya Zettler from VICA. VICA is here to support this report, and we want to thank the hard work of Council President Garcetti and Councilmember Smith, as well as their leadership on moving this forward. We know that this is a first step, and we hope that this will be enacted quickly and we can begin this pilot program and take a look at the results of this and see how we can expand it and help with the decisions that the city is making. We know that as the city develops new policies, it needs the tools during its legislative analysis and its legislative decision-making process to incorporate all of the various tools that we have, and this will just be an additional tool. We hope that this office and the staff in the office will have an objective and independent analysis that can be beneficial both for the council members and for the public to review. Thank you so much.
I think we'd also like to thank the CAO for the good work that they have done and really making the idea that this needs to be an independent analysis really a priority. So they've done some really,
Thank you.
making some very good recommendations.
Okay, colleagues, on this report, the CAO and CLA has given us three options as to placement and several recommendations to moving forward on the qualifications. From my perspective, I would like to see us move the CAO report and amend it to have option 2 be the proposal, to move to the option 2, which designates the position in the CAO's office, and that we go forward on the qualifications for the RFQ, and that we create the panel qualified consultants, and certainly request that funding be moved to the CAO's office for implementation.
I would say that just as long as it's a foundation for
building. Yeah, and I think, again, Mr. Smith is accurate that we can add in there that in developing this, that we continue to look at the criteria and the operations and the substance of the San Francisco model to continue moving forward to develop the model in the city of Los Angeles, but that we select option 2 with those caveats. So we would accept the CLA-CO report with those amendments. Thank you. The amendment, basically, the committee would endorse the CAO-CLA report. The amendment would be that we choose option 2 as to the placement of the operation.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, the CAO-CLA recommendations that you're suggesting are already contained in recommendations 1 and 2 of the CAO report. So your committee should adopt recommendations 1 and 2, and that accomplishes your stated objective.
Your name for the record.
My name is Avad Katayan.
What I was trying to do was that both of item 1 and 2 talked about a pilot eventually going to the Economic Development Department.
No, number 1 says put it in the CAO.
Okay, but it says pending the final action on the creation of the Economic Development Department, establish this position as a pilot in the CAO's office. I was saying in selecting option 2, that we're basically saying put it in the CAO's office and with 1A, B, C, and D, that we support the A, B, C, and D.
So you're saying take out the pending final action of the creation?
That's my
Okay, so
recommendation. that
it
we-
should read establish an Office of Economic Analysis
In the CAO's
in the
office.
CAO's office, got it.
And
So
that
it's
we-
not option 2, it's basically, it's accepting option 1 with the...
When I say option 2, it's on the front page, where you gave
Okay.
us 3 options of placement.
Oh,
Right.
So that's what I was referring.
Oh, I get it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So I'm going back to the recommendations section. If you take out, you're suggesting taking out the words pending final action on the creation of economic development.
That we just adopt recommendation 1, that we place this in the CAO's office, and we endorse A, B, C, and D.
And then to be consistent with Mr. Smith, I would recommend you still have number 2 that says, as part of the deliberations of the creation of the economic development, consider establishing.
And
So it
that-
doesn't make it pending, but it makes it part of the larger discussion.
Yeah, Bill?
It's a future discussion.
Right.
Yeah. And I think the issue that Mr. Smith said, that whatever we're doing is going to be built upon. It's not a pilot for the fiscal year. It's something that we want to use the $250,000 today, but look for the future, that
Right.
it just keeps getting enhanced.
So,
Okay.
it would be 1 and 2 on page 4.
Right.
1A through D and 2.
Yeah. So, is that clear?
Yes.
Thank you.
there's mud. Okay, we'd like to go back to item 3.
Let me do this and say, because I want to do 3, 4, 5, 6,
Six.
and 12.
Well, together.
Together. And what else is left? Is that 9?
We have 7, and we have 8, and then 9, yes.
Okay. If we can do those, and then lump all of them as the last item.
Okay. So let's go to item 7, which is the CAO report relative to the short-term debt ratings for 2010 tax and revenue anticipation notes, which is...
Good afternoon, Harto from the CAO office. The 2 memo relates to the city's 2010 trend, that is the tax and revenue anticipation notes. The adopted budget includes the sale of up to $1.2 billion in TRAN. These notes are borrowed and repaid within the fiscal year. The proceeds from this recent TRAN issuance will be used to prepay the city's retirement and pension systems, provide $450 million in short-term cash flow needs for the city during the first half of the fiscal year. I will start with the memo dated June 24th, which relates to the city's highest short-term debt ratings for the 2010 TRAN. During the week of June 21st, the city received the highest short-term ratings for its TRAN. Rating agencies stated these ratings reflect the city's general creditworthiness, strong record of accurate cash flow projections, spending reductions in last fiscal year and this fiscal year, especially for the labor savings costs for this fiscal year, its early set-aside payments, and the strong coverage from the cash flow projections. In the same week, my office met face-to-face with investors and rating agencies in the East Coast to further discuss the city's financial condition, the budget challenges and solutions. Moving on to the second memo dated July 2nd, this was the results from our TRAN sale and the investor feedback we got. On June 30th, we sold our TRAN in the aggregate amount of about $1.164 billion on a negotiated basis. There was 4 repayment dates, also known as maturities. The market was very receptive to the first 2 maturities, and all of March and April maturity was sold at a yield of 0.55% for March and 0.60% for April. However, the market wasn't receptive to the last 2 maturities, which was May and June. Investors expressed concerns related to the recent articles and opinion pieces that was published regarding the city's financial conditions. Also, investors noted that they had concerns about the city charter rule that authorized the controller to borrow from special funds up to the last Monday of April. After the last Monday of April, any special fund borrowing would require council action. Investors were concerned that City Council would not be able to act swiftly to approve such special fund borrowing. So therefore, May and June, those maturities were unsold. However, our lead underwriter, J.P. Morgan, supported the city's TRAN and bought $252 million, which is about 20% of the notes, as a member order, which resulted in 0.8% for May for the yields and 0.85% for the June yields. And the overall true interest cost to the city is 0.79%.
Let me just ask, one thing that was unclear is that just before we went out to trans, we actually got a bump in the rating, our ratings overall, and it was we were advised they were the highest ratings for short-term loan, and then for them to go to the market and say the last 2 months of our offer was concerned about our financial condition, that seemed inconsistent to me.
It's not solely based on just the ratings. The money market funds are looking at other issues too, like our financial management, and what they hear in the media affects their decisions as well.
But the issue, that rule about this controller borrowing from special funds up until April has been with us for a few decades. And so are they concerned that the controller has that latitude, or that after April, the council has the latitude?
It's the after April. They're afraid that city council won't act in a timely manner to approve the action if it's needed.
Okay, but I mean, our history of moving funds in the sense of close to the end of the fiscal year and throughout the fiscal year, is there a specific failure to act that they're referring to?
No, we told the investors that City Council has always acted and has always made the necessary actions to move funds around, but it was their decision at the end of the day.
So in June, as Hala described, we went back east. We met with the rating agencies. We had a good discussion, but we also met with the investors. And I think part of what we should take away from this is they are two distinct groups. One actually rates, they do their analysis and they give us a rating, and we did receive the highest rating. But then there is the people that actually purchase our bonds. And they had concerns, given all of the headline noise that occurred over this past year. The whole DWP issue, the whole American opinion piece, all those things have basically made them very nervous in purchasing our notes. And so while they were more comfortable in purchasing the first two maturities, they had a lot more concern about those maturities that expired a little bit later in the year, when perhaps funds the city would run out of money.
Natalie Brill, Sales Office. I think that also you're correct. This has been around forever, but in the past we haven't had 4 maturities, 4 different dates we paid off bonds. We had 1 in June. And so all the money that was accumulating was for that 1 payment in June. Now you have 4 payments. So as you put money aside for those payments, they're concerned that the first 2 payments will be paid, no problem, but that the second 2 payments in May and June, that we won't act quickly enough to set money aside to make those 2 payments. And we heard that up to the day of the sale. Well, we basically were on the phone with investors going, well, we've always made our set-aside payments. We know the council acts. When we submit our reports, they move money around. It happened this year with the reserve fund. We don't see a problem, but there was still some trepidation from investors.
Now, remind us of the recommendation to split the maturity dates on this one when we've done in the past just one maturity date?
Last year, we split it into 3 because we were not getting enough orders for the June maturity. Last year, it had more to do with the fact that people thought interest rates were going to go up, so they didn't want to invest their money for a whole year. They wanted to invest their money for 6 months or 7 months or 8 months. Based on our cash flows, the soonest we can make a payment is the end of March. So when the underwriters went out and started talking to investors, they saw a lot more interest in doing the same thing. There was a lot of interest for March, April, but that we knew that based on our cash flows, we still would have needed May and a June. We didn't have enough money to put everything into March and March and April. We would also need May and June. So the decision of the team was based on these market conditions that we would split it into 4. Pretty evenly, I think. I think the biggest maturity was the $315 million somewhere.
The biggest maturity was in May,
Right.
316.
For 315. And again, that's based on how we can pay back. So based on the money that comes into the city, that's how a lot of those maturities are determined. You know, the market looks at that. They look at, how they want to invest their money. So those maturities are really based on, they're market driven. For example, the county sold one maturity just in June, and their interest cost was 0.85%, at the highest. So they don't have the cash flow to split it into 4. So, it really is based on your cash flows and on the market. That's how you determine the maturities within the fiscal year.
Great. Paul?
I'm just wondering if there's any process that we could take to avoid this kind of thing from happening. I don't know if it's more meeting with investors. I don't know.
We tried that. I mean, the meeting with investors in Boston and New York was very successful. We had, I believe, 25 in Boston and about close to 40 in New York. And it was very, very positive. I think the people who bought our debt would not have if we had not met with them. I think that's the conclusion that Miguel, Ray, and I came to, that it was good we went out there because they had read articles, and it's not just the people who are buying the debt, it's the people who are buying from them too, like in the mutual funds. You invest in a mutual fund, the city of LA is part of the portfolio, you start calling your broker going, why am I investing with the city of LA when I'm reading in the Wall Street Journal that they're going, out of business, don't have enough money. So those people who buy the bonds for the mutual funds, have to be able to respond to them. And being out there and providing them the booklet that's attached to the report really helped them to be able to buy our bonds. So it was very successful. And we hadn't been to New York in 5 years because we didn't think we really needed to. But times have changed.
Well,
So-
that's an observation I'd make, although it obviously still didn't solve the problem. But clearly, even with the rating agencies, I think they tend to just glance at our bad articles and make their assumptions. So if we can
Correct.
be out there and do more hand-holding and provide more information, I have to assume it's worth, many-fold the effort and the cost of doing that.
It is, and what you received in your packet, we also did it on the internet, so people could go onto the internet and listen also. They weren't able to make the meetings, they were able to listen to it. So every bond deal that we have now, we're starting to do that more and more. Like I said, in the past, we didn't have to. We had the city of LA, we had a really good credit ratings, we didn't have any real bad press, but the last 2 years have taken their toll on us.
Bill?
No.
Let me just ask one. What does the bank do that bought the $250 million? Do they sell it subsequently, or what happens to that underwriting?
JP Morgan Securities purchased the remaining $252 million. Yeah, and they would go back out to the market and sell it.
At their own pace?
Yeah, if they go back to secondary
And they have
market.
the flexibility to price it at a certain price. They wanted control of it so that they could price it lower than 1%.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Right. That's why they bought it all. And it's ironic because the other two that bought the most Who bought 179 million?
Fidelity and Vanguard.
Those were the, besides JP Morgan, those were the two biggest buyers, 179 by two firms. That was it. Everything else was under like 150, 100 million, which is never, I mean, that's unheard of. We used to get bids for 250, 300 million from one purchaser. We had quite a bit of purchasers this time. It took a lot to really, and the day of the sale, I was talking to investors, which I haven't ever done before. It was partly the market and partly us. I mean, it was a combination of the two.
Thank you very much. We'll note and file that report. You know, one thing, we'll make a little transition. I understand Mr. Smith and Mr. Rosenthal has to leave at 3, so why don't we go to the Macias report first, so that if they have comments on it, we can capture those.
Okay. All right. So let's start with item 3, which was continued from the March 1st meeting, which is the Office of Finance report transmitting the Macias consulting report relative to an assessment of the feasibility of centralizing billing collection on a citywide basis. We have item 4 was a motion design Garcetti relative to the billing amnesty program. Item 5 is a motion Han Koretz relative to centralized billing collections process. Item 6 is a motion Koretz Han Garcetti relative to citywide billing collection practices. And then item 12 is basically the Office of Finance report to relative accounts receivable dashboard for the third quarter of fiscal year 2009-10.
Good afternoon, Antoinette Crisval, Office of Finance, and with me today is Jeffrey Whitmore, who's the Revenue Manager. Regarding item number 1, we did submit the Macias report, I think it was back in early January, to your committee with the expectation and hope that Macias would make a presentation, but it was continued. So if it is the desire of the committee, we can bring Macias in and have them make a formal presentation. However, I would like to report that since our report has been released, that your committee and full council did approve the recommendation to move forward with Phase 1 of the Macias report, which basically would result in better reporting metrics and performance metrics for accounts receivable to help improve on the collection of delinquent debt, with the anticipation of a payback of, I think it's about $16 million over a 6-year period. So it's about 2.1 million, give or take, per year in net revenue benefit. Unfortunately, the funding has not been provided as of yet completely to move forward with Phase 1. We have worked, Office of Finance has worked closely with the CAO's office, the Information Technology Agency, as well as discussions with the Controller's Office and members of the FMS project in terms of developing a mechanism to be able to utilize the FMS system to provide for this Phase 1 implementation, with the expectation, once that's fully implemented, to move forward with Phase 2 of the Macias report, but advance a number of the recommendations. So we do urge moving forward with funding. I know the CAO will be coming back with their report. In the report, it includes the amendment for CGI, which is the vendor that's supporting the FMS project to do certain work, as well as the Office of Finance to work on the operational side. We have 3 positions that we have determined that are necessary to move this forward. One position was approved in the budget. We just need the authority to move forward to fill the position, and the other 2 are new positions. So we're hopeful that this will move forward so that we can proceed and start with Phase 1. Overall, the Macias report did state that centralization, the city is feasible, that the city should move forward with it. Macias indicated that, relative to ambulance billings, that the city should move forward with the contract. They spoke about a dual responsibility, finance and fire, relative to the EMS billings. We don't necessarily agree with the dual responsibility. We think it should be just one department because in terms of accountability, it's better to have one department responsible for the process from beginning to end to ensure that it moves forward. And so we think that that should be looked at. But most importantly, moving it forward, because ambulance billings and I think parking citations was one of the other recommendations in the Macias report in terms of the greater share of the outstanding accounts receivables.
Ray, let me ask you on the issue of the finances, that we dealt with one item today on the ambulance billing that's coming to council, I think on the 20th. And so where are we on not only the FMIS accounts receivable, but other funding to implement phase one?
Well, there was the $500,000 that was set aside in the budget for basically the accounts receivable working through, that module working through the FMS project. And as I reported earlier, we're waiting for some further information so we can complete that and send that forward and get that contract amendment and move forward. There were other actions taken through the budget, but that was sort of the primary big action in order to move forward on the system piece and then look at, the centralization.
Because one of the things that somewhere, I think in one of our mid-year, we approved phase one going forward. Is there funding? Antoinette is saying that we haven't provided funding to get phase one off the ground. Is there additional funding that we approved beyond the FMIS?
As far as I know, that's the only funding that was approved.
Let me ask, Antoinette, did I understand you correctly? Is there other funding that's needed to get phase one off the ground other than FMIS?
I believe the $500,000 that Ray spoke to is what we estimated working with ITA to implement phase one is about $1 million, and I think $500,000 was approved as part of the year-end FSR report. And I think the money, I don't know if it's been set aside as of yet, and then you have the remainder amount, which I'm not clear where that's going to come from.
Well, no, beyond FMIS, is there funding to implement phase one that has not been allocated that your department's looking for, or?
What we need the positions in order to do the work. We identified 3 positions that are necessary to move forward with phase one. We can't handle that in-house with existing staff. We've had a significant reduction in our staff, and we're focused on a number of revenue programs that were approved by your council, your body, for this fiscal year, and so that's the focus for the staff. So we do need to get the 3 positions.
Are these 3 unfreezes, or is this 3 new positions?
One of the positions was approved in the budget. We just need the approval from the Management Hiring Committee to move that forward. The other 2 are new positions that will need to go through the council process.
Where are we on that?
So this is sort of backup. So there was roughly, when we talked about, there's about $1 million. $500,000 was set aside last year. The other half we anticipated to use MEGLA funding because that we could charge actually to the FMS project. The report that is sort of pending is basically there's the 2 pieces. It includes the funding and then also includes the recommendation to move forward on the 3 positions. And so that we hope to get to as a package before the break.
Very good.
Yeah, the phase 2 funding, it's estimated at $7.5 million as a one-time cost, so that'd be in fiscal year 12 or 13 then?
But we actually think, in terms of the phase 2, some of that could be advanced. I think part of phase 2 included moving forward with the ambulance billing contract, and that was, Macias included that, I believe, as phase 2. We think that should be part of phase 1, but that's on a separate track. As, your committee actually heard the fire report this morning, and so that's a significant part of phase 2 that we think should move forward very quickly because there is a benefit overall to the city with that particular effort. The other parts of phase 2, we think part of that could be folded into the FMS project, but that would take place once we get phase 1, which really identifies the reporting metrics. Phase 2 of the FMS would be once we go live with the FMS project, effective July 1, 2011, and include Phase 1 of the ARS centralization, then we could also fold in parts of Phase 2 in FMS, in addition to the fact that some of these AR systems that were noted in the Macias report for Phase 2 are actually going to be part of the AR centralization, part of the FMS project. So much of that's going to be advanced, and the cost will definitely not be in the range that has been identified. So we think
And it's going to, eventually, it's going to meld together
Correct.
down the road.
Correct.
That'll be our
Yes,
thought.
because we'll have a standard system in place where everything is
But
standardized.
the cost factors will probably diminish as we get into that later.
Right, because we will have implemented Phase 1, which will have the stepping stone to go beyond that, in addition to the separate track with the ambulance billings and the parking citation contract, which is very key in terms of on the parking citation side. Right now, that contract, I believe it expires in March 2011. So.
Yeah, I'm just excited about the dollar figures you threw in here. You're saying that $274 million over 6 years?
Well, actually, that is what the Macias consulting firm
What do you think?
identified. And so that's their numbers, which they can address. But the bulk of it is attributed to the ambulance billings in terms of the outsourcing. I think that is what was noted in the controller's report when they did their review of the Macias report, that most of that will come from that based on industry standards of what they have seen for other ambulance billings that have been outsourced and handled by an outside firm.
Can we do a parallel and do it in 4 years rather than 6, or is that pushing it?
For Phase, I'm sorry.
Well, for getting it all together, because in your recommendation, it says that we could realize in 1 or 2 centralizations, the city would expect a net increase potential revenues of $274 million over 6 years.
Well, I think you're going to see a benefit, well, actually, most of it's tied to the ambulance billing, and that project is moving forward. It was approved by Public Safety Committee this morning with, I think it's going to go to full council for consideration. So once that's approved, the fire department would be able to proceed with the contract.
Perfect.
And so, of course, it will be, implemented in less than 6 years.
Let me just ask on the issue of the Macias report, the first several pages give a very detailed outline as to milestones and a project leader and all that. Are we following that guideline as it relates to what they proposed as to implementing this Phase 1 and 2?
Well, some of it's a little dated from the standpoint that Macias had assumed that I think they assumed that the ambulance billing contract was going to be executed in January.
I know the dates are out of sync.
Right.
But the milestones as to a person in charge of the project leader, and things that they march through a couple-of-year process, are we following that template?
We're following that in a different manner, and that's dealing with the AR centralization through the FMS project, whereby we will be utilizing CGI, which is an existing vendor supporting FMS, that will be working on the AR centralization piece in addition to the core FMS project, and then the 3 additional staff on the Office of Finance side. So it's not going to be a project, it's not going to be structured in that particular manner. I think one of the things that we did find is that the Macias estimate, I think they had about $800,000 for Phase 1, is understated. It didn't take into consideration a number of things.
Yeah,
So we're following it.
They said it was more, the 800 was more like 1.4, and the 7.8 million was more like 12 million for Phase 2.
Right, but the approach that we're taking is we're leveraging the FMS project to move forward with Phase 1 expeditiously, and not going outside to hire a project manager to manage the project, purchase an off-the-shelf, or customize a separate system separate from the FMS project. So we're going through, we're basically addressing Phase 1 the FMS project. We just need to move forward with, as Ray indicated, the report that they will be releasing. The funding, for the most part, has been provided, and part of it's going to come from MICLA. It's just a matter of now just getting the report approved, getting the positions in place, leveraging the FMS project resources, particularly the CGI component and the contract amendment, and moving forward much quicker and implementing it much sooner than the Macias approach.
Then let me just ask, on addressing Macias and centralized, we're all in the same mind that Department of Finance is going to be that centralized place. Is that is that the direction everyone's working on?
I guess when you speak to centralization in terms of who will be managing the effort, the way it's structured in the Macias report is more of a shared responsibility.
But what I understood when they said shared is departments create a bill, they have a short time in which they try to recover it.
Right.
And then they transfer it to finance to collect it. And from what I understood, they thought it was more expensive if we moved the entire billing and that first phase to one place. But they thought departments had the ability to bill and a short time of collect, but then it should be moved for overall collection to finance, to then go to the agencies that are hired to do that. And at the time it's released from that agency, it goes back to the department. I dispute whether that's a step that's necessary. But again, if we're talking about the centralized collection of debt, is everybody of the mind that Department of Finance is going to be the focal point that sends that stuff to one location after a brief period of billing and effort to collect?
I hear what you're saying. I think what's very important is the accountability piece, and I think if you having one department responsible from beginning to end, and you have the standardization and everything in place. We didn't get to that point through the budget process, so where we are is now having departments submit their accounts to the Office of Finance or the collection agencies. We're in that place right now. But how is it going to improve? It's going to improve because we will have the FMS system as a focal point for submitting the accounts receivable information for the city, for Office of Finance, the CAO, CLA Council, Mayor's Office, to be able to see exactly where departments are relative to their initial accounts receivable billings, where the departments are as it relates to referral of accounts to the collection agencies after a period of time, and where departments are relative to writing off those delinquent receivables. So
let me just ask, I get some maybe reluctance in your voice. Are you looking at, when we say centralize the debt collection, that everything from billing and should be in one place as a process? Or are you looking at it to have departments maintain the billing part of it and then the collection goes to a centralized place? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out where you are as it relates to Department of Finance.
Well, I mean, I think it would be better to have it in one department.
I mean, the entire process?
The billing and collection function.
Okay.
But because the systems are dispersed throughout the city, the next step would be to have a form of a centralized database to capture the information so that there would be better reporting of the accounts receivable, as well as the other necessary steps that would be taken to improve collections. So we're not at the point where it will be, everything would be centralized in Office of Finance, because the point is that if the departments are responsible for the initial billings, you still need to make sure that those accounts are referred timely. And we're in that place right now with the third quarter report, where not all departments are referring accounts timely to collections or to the citywide collections unit. So we're in that place right now, and so we're, there's not,
But my understanding is that it would be significantly more expensive by the assessment of Macias if everything went, you got rid of all of the decentralized structure and put it in one place.
that is correct, and that's why using the FMS project is the first step, or phase one of the centralization, to at least get all of the accounts receivable in one place so that there's a centralized database of the outstanding receivables by department, by type of service, by type of debt, to provide better reports, as well as to improve upon the collections overall.
Do we still have to create some ordinances to standardize the length of time that a department keeps a debt? And I know you used 45, but I thought there were some ordinances that allowed 60 days and longer. Are we in the process of fixing those ordinances for that standardization?
The Executive Directive number 5 basically instructs departments to submit their debt after 45 days delinquency. With the fire accounts, the ordinance is in place and is after 9 months, which is what we all had agreed upon would be a sufficient time as to when those accounts should be referred to the collection agencies. So that's in place. In fire, they are referring accounts to the collection agencies.
Are they doing it within 45 days?
No, they're doing it within 9 months.
Now what is, in the sense, there were several that I thought we had cleaned up to where they were all going to be consistent.
The other departments should be referring accounts within
So other than
45
fire,
days.
everybody should be on a 45-day period.
Right, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, in addition to the 45 days, is there any other impediments to get other than people just appear not to have done it, but impediments to get you the debt within 45 days?
There are exceptions to the rules, if you will. I think when departments have already contacted and have promises to pay, or people are in payment arrangements, then they generally do not refer. But that has been an ongoing issue, and we encourage departments constantly that unless there is some unusual exception, they should be referring in 45 days. And more times than not, is my understanding that they just simply are not.
Okay, but now, but I thought we were thinking about a global ordinance that made it, that it wasn't discretionary, that they had to move that debt after a 45-day period, irrespective of what arrangements might be there or things of that. I mean, is the city attorney working with you on that global ordinance?
We've had communication with the city attorney. The initial, what was initially indicated to me was that they did not feel that global ordinance would work. The individual ordinances would have to be prepared for each department, but we continue to be in discussion about that.
Okay, do we have, I just saw Pete, is he still here? Let me ask Pete if you come up and talk about the ordinances, because I thought we had, as a committee, had talked about standardizing this 45-day period so that everybody's working. And I think the other one we were trying to standardize is the one that keeps coming up, is where every department applies an interest rate and a penalty rate. And that was supposed to be looked at, basically eliminate the existing ordinance that were to the contrary and have a global ordinance. And I was wondering where that is, or where are we on that issue?
I've not been party to those discussions, but I do know that they've been going on with Office of Finance and our staff. As I was of the assumption that we had throughout the city a requirement that accounts receivable be referred after. It used to be 60 days. It was changed to 45, but that's a universal requirement already. Whether there are sanctions that can be brought to bear for enforcement, given the resources of departments to do that work and to prioritize it to do that, I can't address that. And I don't know that that's been a factor that was discussed between Office of Finance and our attorneys in the Financial Services Group. But I can tell you it's a practical consideration.
Okay. I just need to find out, is there a limitation in the sense of some of these ordinances that are in place that give a variety of dates? Is there an ability to...
I'm not aware that there are, except for the fire department, because of their billing needs and billing the states, Medi-Cal and
Now, are they going to
various
still need
companies,
9
insurance
months,
companies.
even with the system that was discussed today in public safety and personnel?
I believe that was the understanding that, as to what would be provided.
We believe the maximum would be 9 months, so it's up to 9 months. Certainly, we want them to refer the account sooner than later, but if they're dealing with Medi-Cal or Medicaid or insurance companies and the like, it could potentially take up to 9 months. But so the ordinance is such that it's up to 9 months. It's not.
Let me ask Georgia.
Sure.
She knows the stuff in her sleep. Where are we on the 9 months in the sense of the fire department?
The reason why we all agreed to 9 months is because of the delays it takes in order for us to get reimbursement through the Medicare and Medi-Cal systems. And so we felt that before you can send someone to collections, we wanted to make sure that we exhausted all the insurance efforts. Also, what happens is people have secondary insurance, so you'll bill a primary, then the primary will pay, and then the secondary will pay after that. And because of all the delays it takes in order to do that, we felt 9 months was a reasonable time, and everyone agreed.
Okay, so up to 9 months, but
Yes.
at that point, when you transfer it to Department of Finance, does it come with the interest and penalty calculated? Is that a standard
Yes,
process for
when
the
it-
fire department? That when you get ready to transfer it, it has the penalty and interest attached?
When we send it, what we do is we send it off to collections now, where...
Now, collections
and
are
then-
the same people that they use, right?
Yes, it's the same vendor. And so what they do is they will attach penalties and fines to those bills.
That's the vendor's job, then. You just send the...
You know what happens is they'll go back, and this is where it gets a little confusing, because we do it with some penalties and interest on the other accounts, but on the ambulance accounts, and help me make sure that we've got this right, is that the vendor will go back, they'll exercise their collections, and then they'll take that 18% that we talked about earlier today off of it, that the city actually will pay for. On the other types of business accounts, like for the permit fees and those types of things, that's when we'll assess penalties or interest, depending on what the case may be. And going back to our conversations, some of it's tied back to the fire code and those instances. And so that's the time when they'll do that, but not on the ambulance.
But the fire code may prohibit having penalties and interest?
The fire code will allow us in some instances to charge penalties. And so in some instances, like we've talked about in some of the other committees, it's like a 50% penalty. But then it doesn't allow for interest. And one of the things we're trying to go back, but it's taking us a significant amount of time, is as they rewrite the fire code to allow us to streamline that so we can apply it consistently across the board.
Is that the industrial fee that we're...
All of the fees, all the fire prevention fees that we charge for all fall into that category.
And we'll be happy to work with them and try and come up with a standardized system. I think what we may be finding is that in some departments, the penalties, and particularly the penalties, not the interest, are so high right now that if you standardize them, you're going to lose money.
Yeah. But I think the thing is, I don't believe that we're trying to standardize the penalties. We're saying that they should all, every department's coming up with, we're saying they should have interest and penalty to each bill. That's what we're saying. We're standardizing that they basically attach penalty and interest to each delinquent bill. We're not saying the penalty and interest has to be 3%.
Well, Mr. Parks, if I may, I think what we're moving toward is uniformity, just as you said. And I think departments that do not have a template in place for charging penalties and interest, if they don't, then we make recommendations to them about the appropriate penalty, or at least what the Department of Finance uses. We give that to them as a template. There are situations where departments are mandated to charge a particular penalty, for instance.
Mandated in what regard?
I'm sorry?
Who's mandating it? Is it an ordinance?
Ordinance, and let's say Public Works Sanitation, for instance, and they have a particular penalty assessment that they utilize. But excluding those type of departments, we're trying as much as possible to look for uniformity in the application of penalty and interest. But many departments don't charge interest at all.
Okay. So the thing is, what we need is, for standardization, is the ability to, number one, make sure that we know who the exempt departments. If the fire department has 90 days, if Public Works has some ordinances that create a different function, but then everyone else should be on the 45-day issue. And if that's the case, then we need a global ordinance that says everybody needs to send it in 45. The other thing is that we need to determine if there is nothing that preempts it, that every delinquent bill has a penalty and interest. And so we
Right.
need to have that kind of language overall so that we can ensure that it is consistent unless there's something that prohibits it. And if it's an ordinance that's in the city, then that ordinance can be altered. If state law, that's a different issue. But it would appear if it's an ordinance in the city that prohibits it, that ordinance can be changed to make it consistent so that the billing records are as consistent as we make it.
That's correct, sir. And in our quarterly report, the third quarter report, which is, I think, the last item on your agenda, we do make a recommendation asking the departments to work with their city attorney liaison to draft an ordinance that would allow for the application of interest and penalties. And absent any of those departments having interest and or penalties in place, that they should, we recommend that they use the interest and penalty standards that we have in Office of Finance, which we do update on the interest side annually. So we do have that in place. But it may be better just to have the city attorney's office.
Address that. Is that the attorney that works with finance that would be doing
Yes,
that?
it would be our finance group.
Okay.
Yes.
So if we can ask that we can get those, I mean, we've asked before, but that global view of what departments are exempt, if it's fire, public works, and then we have LADOT because they have a contract. Until that contract's resolved, we have to address, allow that to flow. And I think it's important as we see these re-audits and re-audits that we have to remind people that we've covered that ground before, that LADOT has a contract and we can't break that contract. We can go out for RFP in 2011, but until that occurs, you can't go to, what is it, ACS or whatever, and take the documents from them. And then hopefully with the new RFP, there will be the standardization of the 45 days or whatever is being asked for. Okay. So if we can ask the city attorney in the finance group to see how we can do some evaluation on the ordinances and determine what are the ones that are unique and stay in place, which ones have ordinances that are inconsistent with the 45-day issue, and determine if it's state law, what the requirements are, so that we can come up with a consistent policy for the city on interest, penalty, and days of review before coming to finance.
Okay, if I may, I believe the 45 days already applies to everyone across the board except for fire department.
But there was something about public works?
Well, that was the application of penalty.
Okay.
Yeah, the 45 days is...
The interest and penalty may differ from department to department. We can help address
I
that.
mean, the thing is, it may differ by percentage and number, but the thing we're looking for, consistency, should be applied by everyone.
Correct.
So somebody
I
may,
understand.
you know, that's what we need to find. How do we impose that? Okay. And so we can get the two of you to work on that.
And we're in support of if an ordinance, I mean, having an ordinance for the 45-day referral too. Currently, that is in place through the executive directive, but if adding an ordinance would help move that forward, we're definitely in support of that.
And then let me ask from the CAO on we gave some direction at mid-year on the mid-year report on dealing with phase one, and is that now in process, or where are we on that regard?
Well, I think it's sort of, there was a instruction, I mean, to go back and look at it. I think this has sort of been folded up into the whole FMS project, and as Antoinette sort of talked about earlier, there's a couple of different phases kind of being melded together, so to speak. So I think what we will do, actually, we'll check with our staff, and on the report that we're sort of putting forward, perhaps we can sort of include a little bit of language in that, just sort of as an update as far as that prior direction.
Okay. And let me ask one other thing. What is the timeline we need if we want Macias to come and give a verbal report? Are they local?
They're actually in Northern California, so as much time as possible, definitely a week's notice, but a couple of weeks if possible.
So if we held this item to next Monday, we have a meeting next Monday?
Yes.
Okay, if we held it to next Monday for them to come and speak to us, would that be time, and I think,
2 weeks probably would be better, but I certainly will get on the phone this afternoon and try to coordinate
well, it's
that.
really 2 weeks, but we need them for Monday.
We can do that.
All right. But the, is there somebody here from the Controller's office? Yes. Let me just ask you a quick question. On the audit that was publicized recently on finances, is there significant difference between that audit or follow-up and the 2007 audit?
Rick Taguchi, Controller's Office. So you're asking what...
Was there differences, or was it just a follow-up on what may not have happened in 2007?
Yeah, basically, we were just following up on the status of the recommendations from the 2007 audit. We noted that some improvements were made. For example, departments are more diligent about writing out some of the old accounts. For example, back in 2006, the gross receivables were about $700 million. Now they're about $500 million. The gross receivables were overstated because there were a lot of old accounts on the books that were going back like 20 years, and departments are not now writing out some of those accounts. Departments are also better about referring accounts to Office of Finance. We found out that departments are more timely in referring the accounts after the 75 days to the Office of Finance.
So the issue is that there's no new information in the 2010 follow-up?
No.
Okay.
Again, the main recommendation was the centralization. That's still ongoing.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that, because one of the things that I think some people thought it was a brand-new audit, but it's basically going back with, people have been taking pieces of it for the last couple of years to implement, but we haven't complied with all of it.
That's correct. That was a follow-up audit.
All right, thank you. Let me just ask that on a couple of things. For this item, and we have 3 motions that were created in council for item 4, 5, and 6, and they all have some part or relationship with centralized billing, and also reference to the controller's 2007 or 2010 follow-up order or audit. I'd like to, we can hold all of these in committee so that we can get the presentation by Macias, but also I want to make sure that as we move forward, there are some other pending CF numbers that have been in file working on pieces of the 07 audit, and one of them is 07-0465, 07-1886, and then an old CF number 05-2514 are all pieces of this whole revenue issue. And then there are, and then we have a couple of things pending from our revenue day under 08-2738. And then we have the venerable collection sheriff, 08-2122. So if we could put all of those under, for our ability to track them under one CF number, and bring all that as we come back to our meeting next week and have a presentation. And because I think the intent would be to approve those 3 motions that came in last week and move forward on them. But I think we have to have a mechanism to get them all reported under the same umbrella so that we can not have pieces that are just straggling out there. So if we can look at all those CF numbers and see how we might bring them under one.
Council file, I'm sorry, what was the 4th council file number that it was?
Let me see, the one I just gave, we had the one on collection sheriff.
That was 08, that was -2822, but the one before that?
No, the collection sheriff was 08-2122.
2122.
And then the revenue day was under CF 08-2738.
2738.
Then we had two or three others that I gave earlier, the 07-0465, 07-1886, and 05-2514. Those are all part of the whole issue of dealing with collections, revenue, and a lot of issues that are pending in this committee and others. And I think one of them dealing with the some of the revenue is in Public Works Committee and things of that nature. So if we can kind of pull all that together, I think it would help us all keep track of it. We're not going to forget the cards. As you get to a certain age, if you don't say it, it goes away. Okay. So if we can do that, let me ask public comment card, Mr. Farah, on item 3, and we're going to be looking at 3, 4, 5, 6, and 12. And so we'll take your comment. Also, Maya, on item 4. Maya, is this your article?
Yes. Okay. Chairman Parks, thank you. My name is David Farah. When I put in the card to speak, it was because I thought I would be able to answer some questions with respect to funding that were asked by a number of members of your committee who, since I put the card in, are no longer here, but I'll go ahead and answer their questions anyway. The first question related to the funding of the Macias report, and I think you know that the Macias report people and the Office of Finance already reported to our Revenue Commission on their report and their recommendations. And one of the things which we asked, which members of this committee have asked, is how much does all this cost and where are we going to get the money for it? And I think it was identified here today that the first phase was $500 million and the second, $500,000, which has been funded in some way, and the second was $7 million or so, which nobody knows where we'll get the money to do that. And during the course of the discussion of this item in our commission, and with dialogue with the Macias people, we stumbled upon the fact that the EMS, Emergency Medical Services outsourcing, which was in phase 2, was going to result in this huge amount of additional revenue, which I think Mr. Rosendahl referred to as $600 or $700 million over 6 years. Anyway, that's based on an estimate of $70 or $80 million of additional revenue in 1 year, each year, for the next 6 years. And one of the members of our commission said, well, what if we accelerated the council action on the outsourcing of the EMS collections and started that revenue stream, that increased revenue stream early? Couldn't we take some of that money and $7 million of it or so, assuming you're going to get the $1 million a week that I think, $7 million or so could easily fund the Office of Finance's goal, the $7 million that they need in order to implement the entire part of the collections plan. So now, having said that, I think since it was our commission, I think it was a good idea, but I would like to report that since that time, the fire department, it's clear the fire department has already approved the contracts for the EMS collections. The controller has weighed in recommending approval of that, as has the mayor and the CAO. And that item was discussed in committee this morning, and I think is on council agenda for Tuesday without recommendation. And I'd just like to say, assuming council moves that item forward and decides to outsource those EMS collections, I feel confident that within a few months that will generate a significant amount of ongoing weekly revenue of approximately $1 million. And I would recommend that this commission consider taking a portion of that, perhaps the first $7 million or whatever, and allocate it to the Office of Finance to help fund the $7 million shortfall that is essential for the implementation of the entire remaining collections program. That's all.
I appreciate your comments, but I'll just comment that in a perfect world where that money would come in without any strings attached, that may be a great idea. But if you're confronted about October, where revenues may drop as significant as they did last year, then you're trying to not have 1,000 more layoffs And so these are all the balances.
I understand.
That we have. So clearly, and then, you know, the CAO and myself and few have an aversion of earmarking money in the sense, because it's general fund money, and you try to put it in a larger scope. And if you start earmarking, we have departments that say, if I win a case, give me the money. And so we say, well, no, we've already paid for that. And so we have to be very careful about what we earmark, what we don't earmark.
I understand, Mr. Chairman,
I understand, and I think-
and the earmarking thing, I understand completely, but I also wanted to make a subtle advocacy.
It's not subtle, it's very clear.
No, but subtle advocacy for the fact that there's an item on your agenda on Tuesday that could well result in significant additional funding for the city at the level of $1 million a week, and
Is that, you're talking about
the ambulance.
That's on the 20th?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we have that this morning.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Maya Zettler again from VICA, Valley Industry and Commerce Association. We had earlier passed around an article that it featured today in the Los Angeles Business Journal, written by the chairman of the board of VICA, speaking again about collections and the issue that we feel has been not examined closely enough and not been put at the forefront of the issue that the city is now facing. And VICA has been working on this issue for years and years, advocating for a designated collections sheriff or anything else that could be called. We are not interested in what it's called or who gets credit for it. We just want this to happen.
The reason I brought that up is because you were sitting there.
You know, we submitted the VICA 50 recommendations over 2 years ago in March, 2 years, and they were part of a larger set of ideas and reforms and ways to increase revenue and look at budget cuts in the city. And we just don't believe that many of those recommendations have been implemented. And we feel very strongly that any business run like the City of Los Angeles in terms of collections would be out of business by now. So we appreciate the hard work of this committee, and we will be here the next time monitoring this again. And we hope that this is something that we can move on quickly, and we just hope that this isn't something that we put to the side. There have been hearings, there have been motions, there have been more hearings and more motions on this issue, but it doesn't amount to much action. And as we've seen by the recent Comptroller Gruhl report, we feel that we need to have a single point of accountability in the city, and we feel very strongly that this issue is something that could be very beneficial to the city, and we hope that we can push it forward quickly and something that we can take very seriously and move forward on. Thank you so much for your work
And again,
today.
as I mentioned earlier, the reason that we put all this on the agenda with these motions that have kind of gone astray is to bring it under one umbrella, and this committee intends to continue to monitor this until all this is implemented and not have a lot of stragglers. And so made a big push today with the public safety and personnel to get the item on the agenda for the 20th. We've talked seriously about the FMIS doing budget. So a lot of these pieces, but we're going to bring all of it under one CF number so we can monitor it and not have pieces fall apart.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. The only other item on this that we have not dealt with, and we can ask budget to Office of Finance come up on number 12. And this is the one, and if there is someone here representing the mayor's office. And if you can give us just a thumbnail on the third quarter report.
Okay. I'll have Mr. Whitmore address the report, but I'll just speak in general. As you are aware, I think it was sometime in March, we had met with your committee, and one of the recommendations was that the Office of Finance would submit its quarterly accounts receivable report not only to the mayor but also to council. And so we did submit a report for the second quarter, and this particular report is for the third quarter as of March 31, 2010. In the report itself, What we focus on really are the criteria that's in the citywide guidelines that's tied to Executive Directive Number 5. We focus on 5 of the 7 points. One is departments submitting quarterly reports to the Office of Finance, which is the information that we use and compile for the city overall. The second is departments reporting the correct accounts receivable and the aging of receivables. The third is whether departments are referring delinquent accounts timely to the outside collection agencies and citywide collections unit within the 45 days of delinquency. The fourth is the application of interest and penalties on delinquent accounts. And lastly, whether departments are submitting uncollectible accounts timely for write-off to the Board of Review, which is chaired by the controller. The quarterly report it shows that there is approximately $541 million that is outstanding in accounts receivable. The large share of that is fire and transportation. I think that represents probably about 85%, give or take. Overall, just looking at the aging, about $300 million of the $541 million is 121 days to 2 years, to over 2 years past due. Departments are not all departments are referring accounts timely to the collection agencies. We did identify some departments that are not in compliance, and as well as departments that have not submitted accounts to the Board of Review for write-off. And so what we have basically tried to address is that some departments we have seen improvements. The fire department, as I indicated earlier, they are now referring ambulance billings, delinquent ambulance billings to the collection agencies. There are some departments that are 100% compliant, like such as the sanitation department. They are referred accounts timely to, within the 45 days delinquency, to the collection agencies. And so what we are recommending, just to address some of those points that I mentioned earlier, is on page 5 of our report. We're asking that the departments that are noted in the accounts receivable report, that they actually, that the mayor and council instruct city departments to refer all eligible accounts to the city collection agencies and collection unit in 45 days delinquency. And Councilman Parks, as you indicated early about making an ordinance or implementing an ordinance to help solidify that, we're definitely in support of that. The other is we are asking that departments only include the true accounts receivable services in their report, in their information that they submit to us, because what we're finding is that they're including non-accounts receivable, which makes it misleading to the public in terms of the value of the debt that's outstanding. We're asking that the departments report back to the mayor and council with a copy to Office of Finance on the status of the accounts that have been referred to the Board of Review for write-off. And number 4 was the one that we just discussed earlier about the city attorney liaison drafting an ordinance that would allow the application of interest and penalties. And as Mr. Echeverria had indicated, he will work with his finance city attorney representative to come forward with an ordinance that would allow for, to some degree, a standard ordinance for interest and penalties. And to the extent that we have departments that currently apply interest in our penalty, maybe to have a separate ordinance for some of those accounts. The bottom line is that we think that by having the report go both to the mayor and council, that we believe that it would definitely strengthen the impact and the requirements that are necessary to get departments to move forward with the recommendations. And I know that some of them are constrained with staffing, and so that's something that I'm sure some of them will address as we move forward.
Let me ask you, from your department standpoint, is this report, the quarterly report, a audit of Executive Order 5, or does it go beyond Executive Order 5?
It's basically Executive Directive 5 and just addressing the 7 criteria, and it provides an update and a status. And one of the things that we will be doing going forward is we'll have, instead of such a detailed narrative, we will have just a matrix of some sort along with a very small narrative to identify which departments are deficient so that it would help the mayor and council as we move forward. But it's basically a status report on where departments are with the executive directive.
Let me just ask if we can hold 12, but we'd like to have whoever's the most appropriate person for the mayor's office for Monday, so we can find, because one of the things, this report is basically auditing the response to an executive order, and we have little ability to go out and find each general manager that's not complying, and the general manager of finance has little ability to go make them do their job. So we need somebody here from the mayor's office so we can discuss how they can get the implementation of this executive order.
Okay.
So we'll hold all these items till next week. Okay, what's left?
Okay, actually, we have item 8, which is finance report relative to refund claim by...
No, that was a consent.
Is that consent? Okay, I missed that, sorry. So then that leaves basically the last item is item 9, which is a verbal update on Exhibit 8 and other outstanding budget items.
Good afternoon, Karen Kalfan with the CLA's office. What this is in response to is the chairman's request to have an update on Exhibit H and other budget-related instructions at the first meeting of at the first meeting of the month for budget and finance. So basically, what this comprises is a summary of what's in Exhibit H in the budget, which are all the implementing recommendations for the budget, the reports that were requested, and also an update on managed hiring. Pete Echeverria is here to address some of the ordinances, and we have Ray Serrano and I can address some of the managed hiring and the reporting.
Okay. Let me ask you, I know this is a fairly extensive report. Do we have anything that would reflect those that are already completed?
We can compile a summary sheet of all the ordinances, and
that would then give us the ability to just concentrate
on those that are outstanding.
All right, if we can do that, and because the hour's late, if we can just hold that till next week and ask to give us a listing of those that are done, and then we can concentrate on those that are pending.
Okay, now on the ordinances, that's a smaller universe of items, so that's an easier thing to address. Now, with the reports that have been requested, there are probably 100 reports that were requested by departments to come back, so that's a little more involved in tracking. So
I think if we I know there's, because I kind of use Schedule H generically, it's like all the things we haven't gotten finished, but if we can initially look at the four corners of this report and find out what's pending. And then I think the last time we talked to you, Pete, there was something like 30-some ordinances, and we had done about a dozen or something like that.
Right, we identified 31 requests for ordinances that either had not been done already or that were actually not requests for ordinances. Of those, there are approximately 12 pending. I think
12 pending.
I think 6 of those will be done within a week.
Okay.
The balance, the other 6 will be done within 30 days. There may be 1 or 2 that won't be able to be completed in that time. That's what we're talking about.
Are revenue generators?
No, there are maybe half of those that are revenue generators.
Okay. That would be helpful, that if we can, for next week, just have a breakdown of the 30 ordinances that are done, what's left, what we're pending, and then what's on Schedule H that has been completed. And that way we can, like I said, zero in on just those that haven't been done and then know what we can expect to get done.
Okay, and what we can also include in that are any requests for reports where an ordinance would be required, but those wouldn't be before the city attorney just yet. There's something that would need to be generated in order for the city attorney to be instructed to prepare those ordinances. So
I can't begin to tell you how many requests for ordinances we would have. That would be a monumental tasked just to count those.
Yeah, but I think
I'm
the
just
things that
talking
we're
about
most
the ones that
concerned
were-
with are revenue generators, it's number one priority. And then those that are clarifying or implementing programs that's in the budget, those are the things.
Oh, I have no problem focusing on that with respect to Exhibit H. If we're talking about all the ones that we receive on an ongoing basis, that's monumental.
Let's start with H first.
No, and
Okay,
I'm,
report to you later for us.
and the other
Too
ones,
late.
the other ones I'm referring to are just the ones that would implement other budgetary actions, so not trying to make you crazy.
Okay, so we can do that, we can have that next week. So we're here about 3 hours and we continued everything. Did we pun or not?
We did great today.
Okay, no other comments, and so we'll be adjourned.